What is up, guys? Welcome to the Sysadmin Tutorials YouTube channel. In March 2020, VMware released vSphere 7.0. And what better way to start than with an ESXi 7.0 installation video. Now I'm going to be doing this a little bit different to my previous ESXi videos. We're going to be breaking this up into two parts. And the first part is going to be concentrating on the actual installation, where we'll go through and we'll do a GUI installation step by step. And then we're going to show you how you can automate that entire process by using a kickstart script. So in my lab here, I've got a vCenter server, and we're going to be doing this as a nested ESXi. But the same installation steps apply to if you're going to be doing this on a physical server. So let's jump straight into it and we'll launch our vCenter server. Up on screen, I have my base vCenter server. So I'm just going to log in here with my administrator credentials and we'll press enter. Now, just at the bottom, you can see that we have a resource pool called vSphere 7. And within that, we have a VM called ESXi 7-1. I'm just going to edit the VM because I want to show you some settings that I've selected when you're creating a nested ESXi VM. So we'll right click on the virtual machine and we'll select edit settings. For the configuration of this virtual machine, you can see that we've set the resources to 6 CPUs, 12 gig of memory and a 250 gig hard drive. We've also added in 6 adapters where we're going to be pairing each adapter to its specific function. So for example, we've got adapter 1 and 2, and this is going to be used for management and also for virtual machine traffic. Adapter 3 and 4 are going to be used for the vMotion network, and 5 and 6 are going to be used for NFS storage. Now, if we expand the CPU, you can see 3/4 of the way down that we have an option called hardware virtualization. And it's important that you tick this box if you are installing ESXi as a nested ESXi virtual machine. We'll now head on over to the VM Options tab. And if I just expand General Options here, you can see that we've got our guest OS version set at VMware ESXi 6.5 or later. Now we're going to expand the boot options, and we'll just scroll down here. And for secure boot, we want to untick that. So we do not want to enable secure boot. And the reason for that is if you have secure boot enabled when you do your automation with the kickstart script, it will not run the second half of the script. And don't worry, we'll go through all that a little bit later on. But for now, just have that unticked. And the second option is the force EFI setup. So we're going to click that. And we're going to force it to go into the BIOS during the first power on. The reason why we do that is that so it can pause there at that screen and we can mount the CD-ROM ISO file for ESXi. So we'll click on OK. And now we're going to go ahead and power on our ESXi VM. So I'll just click on power on. I'm then going to click on the little window here. And I'm going to launch the VMware Remote Console. So we'll click on that and click on OK. Once the console launches, you'll notice that it is paused here in the boot manager, which is exactly what we want it to do. And we're going to go over to VMRC. We're going to select Removable Devices, CD-ROM Drive 1, and we're going to connect to Disk Image ISO. From within here, we're going to click on the ESXi ISO file, and that is this file right here. You can download that from www.vmware.com. So we'll make sure that that's selected and we'll click on Open. Now that's going to mount the ISO file to this virtual machine. We'll click within the window, so we've got some control. And we'll just use the down arrow and we'll select Virtual IDE CD-ROM drive. So we'll press enter on that. And as you can see, the ESXi installer is starting. So this is booting from the ISO file. Okay, once the installation files have loaded, you'll get to this welcome screen. So welcome to the VMware ESXi 7.0 installation. And here we'll just press enter. And then you'll have the end user license agreement. You can press F11 to accept and continue that. Within this window, we can select our disk where we wish to install ESXi. And you can see here that it has picked up our 250 gig hard disk. So I'm going to press enter on that. If you have multiple ones, just make sure that you've got the right one highlighted. So I've only got one disk there, so I'm just going to press enter. And we're going to accept US default for the keyboard layout. And here we're going to type in a root password, and then we're going to type it in again to confirm it. Once you've typed the password in twice, you can then press enter. So now the ESXi installer has enough information to go through and perform the installation. So we can press F11 to begin the install, or we can press F9 to go back and make any changes. I'm not going to be making any changes, so I'm happy to press F11 and continue with the install. Alright, so the installation has completed successfully. We can press on enter to reboot, and just make sure that you remove the installation media after rebooting. Otherwise it's going to go through and try to do the install again. So we'll press enter and we will reboot the VM. Okay, and here we are at ESXi 7.0. So I'm going to press F2 and we're going to type in the password that we set during the installation. Now the first option, we can reconfigure the root password, but I'm going to go down to configure management network and press enter. And if I just press enter on network adapters, you're going to see the list of adapters that we went through when I edited the virtual machine. So these are the physical adapters, and we've got VMNIC 0 selected, and you can see that with the little cross on the left hand side. And what that means is that this is going to be the network card that we set up the management IP address on. So I'm just going to press on escape. The next option is we can set a VLAN for the management network. And as you can see on the right hand side, it is not set by default. So you can press enter on that and just set the VLAN number if you like. We'll go down to IPv4 configuration and press enter. Now in our setup, we're not going to be disabling IPv4. We're not going to be using DHCP for our management network. We're going to be setting a static IP address. So we'll go down to set static IPv4 address and network configuration, and then we'll click the down arrow again, and we're going to set 192.168.1.216. And for my subnet mask, it's going to be a /24, which is 255.255.255.0. So I'll type that into subnet mask. And lastly, for the default gateway, I'm going to type in 192.168.1.1. Once all your IP information is entered in, we can just press enter. And next up, we'll go down to IPv6 configuration and press enter. For the IPv6 configuration, I'm going to be disabling it. So I'm just going to make sure I've got disable IPv6 and then in brackets restart required selected. And I'll just press the space bar. That's going to select disable IPv6 and we'll press enter. For our DNS configuration, we'll press enter on this. We're going to be manually specifying our DNS entries here. So we'll just press the down arrow and we'll select use the following DNS server addresses and host name. So I'll press spacebar and we'll go down to primary DNS server. And my primary DNS server in this network is 192.168.1.101. I don't have a secondary DNS or an alternate, so I'm going to skip that and I'm going to go down to host name. And for my host name, I'm going to type in ESXi 7-1. Once you have all your information entered, you can press enter. Now we'll move on to custom DNS suffixes. So I'll press enter on that. And for my custom DNS suffix, I'm going to type in vmlab.local. And vmlab.local is part of my Windows Active Directory domain, and that runs purely within my lab. So therefore I'm going to use vmlab.local as my suffix. So I'll press enter, and then we'll press escape to go back to the last menu. Because we've disabled IPv6, it's going to ask to reboot the host. So I'm just going to press Y on that to reboot now, and then we'll come back, we'll log in, and we'll have a look at the rest of the configuration menus. So I'll just press Y, and the host is going to restart. Okay, the host has restarted, so we're going to press F2, and we're going to log in with our root username and password. Now, after configure management network, we have restart management network, where we can restart the management network services. We can then go to test management network. If we press enter on that option, it's going to first try to ping your default gateway, and then secondly your DNS server. And it's also going to try to resolve the hostname ESXi 7-1. So we'll press enter on that. We can see here for the results that it was successful in pinging the default gateway, primary DNS server, and also the host name. So the host name was ESXi 7-1, but because we have a DNS suffix of vmlab.local, it actually did try to ping ESXi 7-1.vmlab.local. And I do have a forward lookup zone set up already in my Active Directory domain controller. So therefore that was successful. So I'm just going to click on or press enter. Now we'll move down and enter into network restore options. This option allows you to restore your network to the default settings, which is back to DHCP. So if there's anything that goes wrong with your setup of your network and you can't get to your host for whatever reason, you can come into this area and you can restore your network settings back to default. And that's pretty handy without having to reinstall the whole ESXi operating system again. So I'm going to press escape. We then have our keyboard configuration where we can change the layout if we like. But if you remember during the setup wizard, we did set US default. So I'm happy with that selection and I'm going to leave it on US default. We'll then move down into troubleshooting options and we'll press enter in this option. The first option here is to enable the ESXi shell. If I just press enter on this option, it will go ahead and enable that. So I'm going to do that now. And to enter into the ESXi shell, I just press Alt F1. And here I log in with my root username and password. And here I have it, I'm logged into the ESXi shell. So I'm just going to type in exit. And then I'm going to press Alt F2 to go back to the GUI. I'm going to leave the ESXi shell disabled, so I'm going to press enter again. With the next option, we can enable SSH. And that'll allow us with a tool such as PuTTY to establish an SSH session to the ESXi host and access the CLI. Before I enable that, I'm going to go to modify ESXi shell and SSH timeouts, because as soon as you enable either the ESXi shell or enable SSH, this option becomes grayed out. So I'll press enter here. The options that you have available here are availability timeout and idle timeout. So you can just set a number for the minutes, or you can set it as 0 to disable any timeouts at all. Because this is a lab system, I'm going to leave it on 0, so I'm just going to press enter. Now we'll go back up and we'll enable SSH, so I'll press enter on this option. The next option is to modify the direct console user interface idle timeout. So that's the console that we're on here. If we press enter on this, you can see that after 10 minutes, it is going to log me off and I will need to log on again. So this is very handy if you open up a console session and then you walk away to do something else. For security reasons, it is going to log you out and then you'll have to re-enter your username and password again. So I'm going to leave this on the default of 10 minutes and we'll press enter. The last option here is it allows us to restart management agents. The only times that we had to restart the management agents is when I've seen a management agent crash and I had to go on and log a VMware support ticket for it. But basically what it did was it disconnected the host from vCenter. So vCenter is the overlaying management tool for ESXi hosts and also introduces about 1,000 other features that come in and complete the vSphere environment. So I had to come in here, restart the management agents, and then the agents fired up and it established or re-established a connection back to vCenter. So that option is there if you do need to use it. We can go ahead and press escape. Next we have the view system logs, and we can view the system logs for syslog, vMKernel, config, management agent, virtual center agent, and also VMware ESXi observation log or VOBD. To view the system logs, you just press the number of the log that you require. So if we want to have a look at vMKernel, we'll press number 2. And here we can use the up and down arrow to scroll through the logs. If you want to search on a particular entry, you can press the / and then you can enter in a term there. So as an example, we'll enter in 64-bit and press enter. And you can see that it's highlighted the 64-bit entries. And then you can just press on N to go next. To quit out of this, you press Q. And we'll then move on to view support information. Here we have 2 pages of information. We have our serial number, our license number, and some certificate information on page 1. If we move to page 2 by pressing page down on the keyboard, we then have some additional information such as the service tag and also some firmware information of the server hardware. The last option that we have here on the left-hand side is reset system configuration. And this is going to reset the whole ESXi host back to factory defaults. To reset the system configuration, you can just press enter and just follow the steps to reset all the configuration. I'm going to press escape. And now we're going to minimize the console because we do not need it anymore. And we're going to go into the web GUI. I'm going to open up a new tab in Chrome. And to access the web user interface, we're just going to go to https:// and the management IP address of our ESXi host. I then get to the certificate warning. I'll click on advance and then I'll click on proceed to the IP address. For the login screen, we're going to log in with our root username and password and go ahead and press enter. The first window that you'll see when you log in for the first time to your ESXi host is going to be the VMware Customer Experience Improvement Program, and you have the option to opt in or opt out of that. I'm going to untick it and click on OK. You can see on the front screen that we've got a warning that SSH is enabled, and it does recommend to disable it. So that's okay because we have gone through and enabled it on purpose, and I will show you later on how to SSH into your ESXi host. Next, you can see that we are running ESXi in evaluation mode. You do get 60 days of evaluation so that you can go through and test the product. Other information that you see here on the homepage is the hardware, configuration, system information, and the performance summary for the last hour. Now we're going to go through and explain a lot more of the options in part 2 of this video. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through and put in some more configuration steps, which we're going to do through the GUI, and then we're going to move on to automating this whole installation experience. On the left-hand side, we're going to go ahead and click on Manage. And then within the System tab, at the bottom, you can see that we've got time and date. So we're going to click on that, and we're going to go through and set an NTP server. So we'll click on Edit NTP Settings. We're going to select Use Network Time Protocol. For the NTP Server Startup Policy, we're going to drop down that menu and we're going to select Start and Stopped with Host. We've entered in here 2 time pool servers for Australia, 0.au.pool.ntp.org and also 1.au.pool.ntp.org. So I'm going to click on Save. In vSphere 7, we also do have the option to configure a precision time protocol, and that allows sub-millisecond time synchronization. For this demo though, we're going to be just sticking with the NTP server setup. So now that we've got that configuration within our host, we are going to go to Services, and we're going to select NTPD. We'll right click on that and we'll select Start. You can see now that the NTP service is running, so time synchronization is happening in the background. Now we're going to go over and set up some networking. So on the left-hand side, we'll click Networking and we'll click on Virtual Switches. You can see here that we have vSwitch 0. If I select vSwitch 0 and I click on Edit Settings, you can see here that we have one uplink, which is VMNIC 0. So that's one physical network card. Now we're going to add a second network card to this vSwitch. So I'll click Cancel and we'll click on Add Uplink. Now if you remember back to the configuration of the virtual machine for ESXi 7, we did have a number of virtual network cards, and the first 2 network cards were going to be responsible for the management network and also for the virtual machine network. So that's what we're setting up here, and that's why we've selected VMNIC 0 and VMNIC 1. So I'll click on Save. And now we're going to add 2 more vSwitches. So we'll click on Add Standard Virtual Switch. And for the name, I'm just going to call it vSwitch 1. Now this is going to be our vMotion network. So I'm going to set the MTU to 9000. And that will allow us to use jumbo frames. You can see here that for uplink 1, it has selected the next available NIC, which is VMNIC 2. We're also going to add in VMNIC 3. So we'll click on Add Uplink. And for uplink 2, we have VMNIC 3. So we'll click on Add. And the last vSwitch we're going to add is vSwitch 2, and that one's going to be responsible for NFS storage. So we'll click on Add Standard Virtual Switch. For the vSwitch name, we'll type in vSwitch2. And for the MTU, we're also going to set this at 9000. You can see here that it's selected the next available network card again, which is VMNIC4. We're going to click on Add Uplink. And we're also going to add in VMNIC5 as the second uplink. So we'll click on Add. So now we have our 3 virtual switches set up. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to VMKernel NICs. And you can see here the VMK or VMKernel 0 is the management IP address. So that's what we're connected to now, 192.168.1.216. We're now going to add in the vMotion VMKernel NIC and also a VMKernel NIC for NFS storage. So we'll click on Add VMKernel NIC. For the port group, we're going to type in vMotion. And for the virtual switch, we're going to select vSwitch1. We don't need to enter a VLAN ID here, as for my lab network, it is all set on the switching in the back end. So I'm just going to leave that on 0. However, for the MTU, we're also going to set this at 9000. The IP version, we're going to leave on IPv4 only. And for IPv4 settings, we're going to click on static. And we'll just expand IPv4 settings. And for the IP address, we're going to type in 192.168.10.216. So that's the subnet for my vMotion network. And the subnet mask for that network is 255.255.255.0. For the TCP IP stack, we're going to drop that down and we're going to select vMotion stack. Now that we've got all our vMotion information entered, we'll click on Create. Now we're going to head back to the top and we're going to click on Add VMKernel NIC again. For the port group, we're going to type in NFS. And for the virtual switch, we're going to drop down this menu and select vSwitch2. We don't need to select any VLAN ID. Again, all the VLANing and everything is done in the back end on my switches. However, for the MTU, we are going to type in here 9000 as well. For IPv4 settings, we're going to click on static and we'll expand the settings. And for the address, I'm going to type in 192.168.2.216. And that network also has a subnet mask of 255.255.255.0. For the TCP IP stack, we can leave this on default TCP IP stack. And for services, we don't need to select anything here. So we'll go ahead and click on the Create button. And there we have it. We have our 3 networks set up. Now the NFS network is going to allow us to bring in storage from an external array using the NFS protocol. And of course the NFS storage array needs to be on the same network, so that 192.168.2 network that we set up previously. Now for the vMotion network, that's going to allow us to seamlessly move virtual machines between ESXi hosts, whether the virtual machine is powered on or powered off. Now to do that, we need to be running vCenter server, and ESXi host will be connected into vCenter server and it will have it under its management umbrella. But don't worry, we'll be covering that in a future video. Now, as I mentioned before, we are going to go through and have a look at the rest of the settings of ESXi, and we're even going to go on and install and create a virtual machine. But for now, being part 1, we just wanted to get our ESXi server set up and configured. And we've done that with the GUI setup method. Now we're going to move on to the scripted and automated method of setting up ESXi. And this comes in very handy if you need to go through and set up multiple ESXi servers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to power off this ESXi server. I'm going to delete the hard drive. I'm going to install a new hard drive. And then we're going to take a look at the scripted install. So the way that works is that when ESXi boots up, it's going to pull down the kickstart script and it's going to read all the configuration information within that script and apply them during the configuration. So the scripted installation is completely hands-off. We don't need to go through and click on anything or going through the GUI method or anything like that. All the configuration is read from that script. So I'm going to go ahead and power this down, delete the hard drive, install a new hard drive, and then we will come back just when we're about to power on the virtual machine. Okay guys, we're back, and as you can see up on screen, we have logged into vCenter. And down the bottom here, we have our ESXi 7-1 virtual machine. So what I'm going to be using is I'm going to be using a tool called HTTP file server. And if you've been following along in my previous tutorials, you'll see that I use this tool quite a bit. And what it does is it allows me to create a HTTP server, and I can just place a file within that server and use it as a download location. So for example, if I go into my folder here, you can see that I've got the kickstart script ks.cfg located here. And then if we open up HTTP file server, on the left-hand side, if I click on ks.cfg, you can see that it gives me a URL here with the IP address / and then the file name ks.cfg. And that's what we're going to be using when we boot up our ESXi server and point it to this kickstart script. Now what I'll do is I'll provide the link to the HTTP file server application in the description below of this video. But for now, let's go over to our ks.cfg file and have a look what's inside. So I'm going to edit this with Notepad++. And this is what the kickstart script file looks like. Now don't worry about copying it line for line because I'm going to be posting this up on GitHub and you can go and grab it there. But now if we take a look and see how this kickstart script is constructed, you can see right from the top there that we go through and accept the end user license agreement. We set the root password for ESXi. We then install on the first disk and we've set it to override VMFS, which we don't really need to override it because this is going to be a brand new disk anyway. And then we go on and we set the static IP address of our ESXi host. So the static IP address that I'm going to be using is 192.168.1.215. And then you can also see there my net mask, my default gateway, and my DNS name server. After it's done that, it's going to reboot the ESXi host. And then when it comes back up online, we are going to go through and set the DNS suffix. We're going to disable IPv6. And then we're going to enable SSH. So we're going to enable the SSH service within ESXi. We're going to enable NTP and set 2 NTP servers there. The servers that we're going to be setting are 0.au.pool.ntp.org and also 1.au.pool.ntp.org. Following on from that, we're going to create the vSwitches, and then we're going to set the vSwitches to an MTU of 9,000. And if I just scroll down a little bit here, the next component will be adding physical NICs to our vSwitches. And then we'll go on and we'll create the VMKernel ports. Once it's done all the networking setup, we're going to put the host into maintenance mode, and then we're going to do a reboot. And the reason why we need to go through and reboot it is because we've gone through and disabled IPv6. So I'm going to minimize Notepad++. And we'll minimize these other windows. We'll minimize HTTP file server. And we'll go back to the virtual machine. We'll right click on the virtual machine and we'll click on Edit Settings. And we'll just go to VM Options. We'll go to Boot Options. And we're going to select Force EFI Setup. So during the next boot, we'll force entry into the EFI Setup screen. Remember also for this to work, we need to disable Secure Boot. So make sure you don't have Secure Boot enabled. And we'll click on OK. Now that we've set our VM to boot into the EFI setup, we can simply right click on the virtual machine, select power and power on. And now we want to launch the remote console. So make sure you select remote console and not web console. So we'll click on that now. So you can see here that we are in the EFI setup screen. Now we'll go up to the VMRC menu. We'll click on that, select removable devices, CD-ROM drive, connect to disk image file ISO, and we want to select our ESXi ISO image here. So I'll select mine and we'll click on open. And now I'll click in the screen so I can move the cursor around, and we'll select to boot from the IDE CD-ROM drive. Now when I press on enter, it's going to start the ESXi setup, and during this time we want to press Shift O. So I'll press enter now and Shift O. So you can see down the bottom that it says CD-ROM boot space run weasel. And here we're going to point ESXi over to our HTTP file server, and we're also going to give it a temporary IP address. So what we're going to type in here is ks equals, and then the URL location to our ks file. And next we'll give it an IP address. So we type in IP equals and then the IP address. And this IP address is just an IP address so that it can communicate to our HTTP file server. Next we'll enter in our netmask. So I'll press space and we'll enter in netmask equals and then the netmask. We can also type in here the default gateway. So I'll just press space and gateway equals and then my gateway IP. And lastly, we can enter in our name server. So we just press space and we type name server equals and the name server IP address. Once we have all that information entered, we can then just simply press enter. And the ESXi installer will begin.
Now we play the waiting game.
Now you can see here that it's reading the installation script. And by default, it's going to try to resolve a DHCP IP address. So you will get this warning up on screen, and this is going to time out. And then after, it's just going to simply continue automatically. So here you can see that it did not get an IP address from the DHCP server. So we can just wait here, or we can press on enter to continue. Since this is a fully automated install, I'm not going to press on enter. I'm just going to let it time out. And here we go, the ESXi installation continues. So now the install has been complete, or the first stage of it, so it's rebooting now. And here we have the kickstart script setting up the second part of our installation, which is enabling SSH, the NTP servers, the vSwitches, and the VMKernel interfaces. And here's the second reboot. And there you have it. We have our ESXi server set up exactly the same way as what we did during the manual way. So now we'll log into our ESXi server and we'll just have a little bit of a look around and see what the script has set up. So I'll minimize the console and we'll open up a new tab in Chrome. And we're going to go to HTTPS, the IP address of the ESXi server. We'll accept the certificate. And we'll log in here with root and the password. Again, you have the option here to join the VMware Customer Experience Improvement Program. I'm going to untick that and we'll click on OK. So you can see here on the first screen that SSH is enabled on this host. So that was from the Kickstart file. If we click on Manage, you can see here that our 2 NTP servers have been set and the NTP server status is running. If we click on Networking, you can see here that we have our 3 vSwitches set up. And if I right click on vSwitch 0 and select Edit, we can see that this switch has 2 physical NICs connected. And this one has an MTU of 1500, which is correct. If I cancel that and edit vSwitch 1, you can see here that we have the MTU 9000. And we also have 2 physical NIC uplinks, which is correct. And the last one, vSwitches 2, we'll edit that. And it also has MTU 9000 and 2 physical NICs, which is what we had in our Kickstart file. So I'll cancel that, and now we'll go to VMKernel NICs. And here we have our 3 VMKernel NICs set up. So we have the management network, our NFS or storage network, and we have our vMotion network as well. And just on the right side here, under IPv4 addresses, we have those IP addresses for those VMKernel ports. So as you can see, using the automated installation of ESXi with the Kickstart script dramatically reduces your installation window. We've gone down to a matter of minutes, as opposed to, I think it maybe took us about 20 minutes or so to go through and manually install that first ESXi server. So you can really see the benefits of that when we come through to install, or if you have to install multiple ESXi servers. So you don't want to be sitting there for 20 minutes installing each one. And that's where you can really use this automated installation method. Okay guys, that completes this ESXi 7.0 installation video. In part 2, we're going to go through and have a look at more settings within ESXi 7.0. And we're also going to set up your first virtual machine. If you have any questions whatsoever, please leave them in the comments below, and I'll do my best at getting through and answering them as quick as I can. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up. And if you're not already a subscriber, please hit that subscribe button and be the first to know whenever I release a new video. Alright guys, that completes this video. We hope to see you again in part 2. Take care and bye for now.